Vietnam, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, and South Africa are all examples of major wars where the weak fought giant, colossal empires in what are nothing less than truly asymmetric conflicts. Let's look at why the weak win wars in this two-part newsreel special. Part 1 is how the weak win and why. In Part 2, we'll examine how Ukraine could possibly defeat Russia in the ongoing conflict between them, which began on February 24th, 2022. I'm Eric Yalek. Why and how do the weak win wars? As anciently as the time of the prophet Samuel, quote, David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, unquote. History provides many examples where the strong lose to the weak. The United States to Vietnam, the Soviet Empire to Afghanistan, Italy to Ethiopia in 1940, and a counterexample where the British Empire defeated the Orange Free State and Transvaal in the South African Boer War in 1902. Over history, the strong usually do win conflicts by overpowering their enemies or through the use of economic strength. Thucydides, in his History of the Peloponnesian War, wrote the definition of power is winning wars. Nevertheless, in almost 30% of wars over history, the weaker side wins, that being the side with fewer troops, less weapons, and less economic resources. Therefore, we need to look carefully at how the strong and the weak fight wars. Through history, strong fighters use two primary means to win wars against weaker powers. First, conventional attack, which means the use of military forces to capture or destroy the adversary's armed forces, such as Israel's destruction of the Egyptian Air Force at the beginning of the Six-Day War in 1967. Second, what strategists refer to as barbarism, which is the harm of non-combatants deliberately, such as Germany's attempt in World War II to bomb civilian targets in Great Britain at the beginning of World War II in 1939. Weak fighters defend themselves with two primary means as well. First, conventional defense, which targets the attacker's armed forces to destroy its ability to progress. But second, guerrilla warfare, which is a method of organizing a society to impose costs on the adversary by avoiding direct military confrontations. The costs are loss to soldiers and supplies, losses to infrastructure, psychological blows, and delays. Guerrilla warfare requires a supportive population and some sort of physical sanctuary, such as poorly regulated border areas like in South Texas, jungle, mountains, or swamps. The most famous guerrilla warfare fighter probably in history was Mao Zedong of China, who said, quote, "In guerrilla warfare, select the tactic of seeming to come from the east and attacking from the west. Avoid the solid, attack the hollow, attack, withdraw, deliver a lightning blow, and seek a similar decision. When guerrillas engage the stronger enemy, they withdraw when he advances, harass him when he stops, strike him when he's weary, pursue him when he withdraws. In guerrilla strategy," Mao said, "the enemy's rear, flanks, and other vulnerable spots are his vital points, and there he must be harassed, attacked, dispersed, exhausted, and annihilated," unquote. So let's examine 4 examples. In the Boer War from 1899 to 1902 in South Africa, the British military and the people of Great Britain recognized their strong financial interests in maintaining control of South Africa and its remarkable gold and diamond resources, as well as control of Cape Town in the south. That was conventional on both sides until June 1900, when the Boers switched to guerrilla war tactics. But in response, the British Empire switched to barbarism against the resident population of the Orange Free State and the Transvaal. Ultimately, the Boers surrendered on May 31st, 1902. The strong beat the weak, but not with conventional warfare, but with barbarism against guerrilla warfare. In the Italo-Ethiopian War, Fascist Italy's strong military forces fought Ethiopia's poorly armed ragtag military fiercely, to the point that Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie had to flee by 1936 from his own country. But from 1936 to 1940, the Ethiopians conducted a relentless guerrilla war against the Italian military in Africa. By 1941, Great Britain finally came into the war and ended it on the side of the emperor, who returned to Ethiopia triumphantly after the defeat of Mussolini and the fascists in 1942. The weak beat the strong when the weak used guerrilla warfare against Italy's conventional war efforts. America's Vietnam War may be the clearest example where the weak beat the most powerful nation in the world. American and South Vietnamese forces made initial advances in the war, but it clearly began to turn around in the mid-1960s. The Tet Offensive in 1968 was a brilliant guerrilla strategy by Ho Chi Minh, even though it was a conventional attack by the weak Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces against much stronger American forces, because what it was a psychological attack, sending shockwaves all the way to the United States domestic world that the communists were not willing to give up in Vietnam. It's an example of the use of conventional military operations as though they were guerrilla warfare in a psychological sense, and it ultimately led to the Vietnamese triumph against the United States. The Soviet Union's occupation of Afghanistan was another classic example of the weak forces, even with some help from the CIA, beating much stronger Soviet military forces due to the use of guerrilla warfare by the Mujahideen, who learned many of those methods from the American military. Basically, what we know is that in conventional fighting, the stronger power wins. But if the weak deploy guerrilla warfare tactics, they have a chance. But if the stronger power resorts to barbarism in response to guerrilla warfare tactics, power wins out and the stronger power will likely win the war. So what does that mean for the war in Ukraine? Please join me for part 2 of this documentary on Monday and we'll find out. And that's the way the world is. See you next time.